I have to tell you, I'm a little in the doghouse. Right after the inauguration, we walk out and we run right into Steve Forbes, and I stammer out, you know, God, we loved both of your talks. They were wonderful. And I'm going, yeah, my wife and I, we're both professors here on physics and chemistry. And we walk away, she goes, you realize you just said I was in chemistry. You notice I didn't correct you. You're still in the doghouse, but I did correct you. Anyways, one thing I have to say, Niva had mentioned that, you know, the 10,000-year-old Earth is nonsense, and that may have been jarring in a Christian context. And Westmont has no official position on young Earth, older. That's not part of our theological statement. But I want to emphasize, among the natural science faculty, not one at Westmont, not one of us hold to a 10,000-year-old Earth. We all believe it's an old Earth. And in the Christian community, that is not a standard position. I give a talk why inerrancy of Scripture requires an old Earth. I mean, that's a talk for another day. I have one for now. But anyways, I gave that to an alumni group once. That was really entertaining. Anyways, I want to talk a little bit about applied science and basic science. Warren kind of alluded to this as well. You know, we all, you know, really relish the advantages of applied science and technology and what it's brought us. You know, antibiotics, communications, radio, TV, cell phones, electricity from the light bulb to computers to, you know, microwave ovens, transportations, planes, trains, and automobiles, the old John Candy movie. Lots of wonderful things it's brought us. But, you know, as students, as people, we want our lives to matter. We want to impact the world. We want to make the world different after we went through than before. And, you know, in the late 60s, biologist Paul Ehrlich wrote a bestseller, The Population Bomb. And if you're old enough like me, you remember how that gripped the country and maybe the world, you know, with the impending doom that was coming. He said, he goes, the battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 70s and 80s, and remember this was written in 68, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon. He also said, I have yet to meet anyone familiar with the situation who thinks India will be self-sufficient in food by 1971. India couldn't possibly feed 200 million more people. Jeff mentioned Norman Borlaug. Who was Norman Borlaug? And that may not be a household name. He developed a semi-dwarf, high-yield, disease-resistant wheat. He introduced it to Mexico, India, and Pakistan. Within a few years, Mexico was a net wheat exporter. Yields in India and Pakistan more than doubled. Some have estimated he has saved hundreds of millions, if not a billion people from starvation. You know, we all honor Mother Teresa for the work that she did with the poor, and rightly so. Her compassion puts us all to shame. The impact she had on people's lives living in the most abject poverty is breathtaking. But in terms of practical impact, did Norman Borlaug make a greater difference than 1,000 Mother Teresas? You know, who was the biology teacher who taught plant biology to Norman Borlaug? You know, who was there? Frank Percival. And think about, you know, you've changed the world because of the educational process. Now, to give fairness to Mother Teresa, she inspired a generation of people to reach out to the poor. So her impact was incredibly broad as well. And if you named one saint in this world today, he said one person in the 20th century, wouldn't it be Mother Teresa? You know, that's going to be our one example. But if you could be a Norman Borlaug and saved hundreds of millions of people from starvation, isn't that breathtaking? I mean, when I was a kid, it was always, if you didn't finish your food, you know, people are starving in India. I spent many a nights figuring out the mechanism to get my peas to India. Because I didn't want them. They're welcome to them. They're starving. They'll eat anything. Anyways, you know, but... You know, Norman Borlaug, okay, he won a Nobel Prize, so he did get some honor along the way. But you know, I mean, science and technology can make an impact. The other thing, Thomas Friedman, if I had my way, The World is Flat would be required reading for all Westmont students. It is a breathtakingly important book to see how the world is today. And part of it is to see the explosion in both India and China in terms of entering the modern world and developing an economy, and the flattening that technology has done to give people throughout the world a chance to participate in a global economy. I was really struck by this one section where he talked about that even though India has a large Muslim population, it hasn't bred the kind of terrorism you see elsewhere. You know, and why is that? And Friedman writes, give young people contexts where they can translate a positive imagination into reality, and they usually don't want to blow up the world, they want to be a part of it. He talked about a Muslim friend whose family in the late 40s had divided, and half went to Pakistan and half went to India. The Pakistan side was not thriving at all, and the Indian side was. And he asked why. And the young man said, well, my father says, in Pakistan, a young Muslim will look at the man in the big mansion on the hill and say, someday I'll kill that man. In India, he'll see the man in the mansion and say, someday I'll be that man. If you want to stop terrorism in its tracks, you want to provide hope. You want to provide a path where life can be better, where it's not a frustration. And we often talk about the competition of the U.S. and foreign economies and China and India rising up. It's a good thing when China and India rise up. When the poor of the world get wealthier, are able to provide for themselves, that's good for everybody. And science and technology can provide hope. You know, and so applied technology obviously has advantages. You know, they're not unmixed, as Warren mentioned, but they have obvious advantages. What about basic science? You know, and the thing here is that, what does it do? You know, what do particle accelerators do? Warren's going to be doing research on a particle accelerator. The Hubble Space Telescope, string theory. Is it going to make a better toaster someday? Well, you never know. I mean, realistically, electricity was basic research. When Ben Franklin was flying kites, nobody thought that electricity was going to become the backbone of technology, and yet it was. It becomes the storehouse of knowledge. But aside from that, there's a saying that applied technology makes our lives more comfortable. Basic science makes our lives more meaningful. When we put a man on the moon, the world held its breath. Why? Because it was an achievement. It was astonishing. We went to another world. We're a species of explorers, and to see a new world is part of who we are. When we read great literature, part of what we're doing is seeing a new world through another's eyes. When an artist paints a painting, we often can see things we never saw before. We always want to know more. We want to grow more. And really, I want to leave with Einstein, because if you quote Einstein, you're in pretty good shape. Einstein describes the feeling a scientist has as a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. Thank you.
Well, we're right up against our conclusion. I do want to draw to your attention the amazement I have that Ken Kihlstrom is the only person I've ever known who could insult Mother Teresa in public and get away with it. Never ceases to amaze me. No, I just love the brilliance that we have in our science departments and our behavioral sciences. And then Kim is here from computer science, not chemistry, and we're grateful for that. But thank you so much. Great panel. We will take Chris' call. Do we have 5 minutes? And Warren will take us to a fourth dimension so that we can make that 15. But why don't we try and do it 5 minutes, and we'll be back. And thank you so much for your attentiveness.